The strongest chain is the one that doesn't look like a chain at all. When someone starts to see themselves through you, when your presence becomes the mirror they depend on, you've already won. They're not addicted to your attention. They're addicted to the version of themselves that only exists when you're around. And that's why they keep coming back. Think about it. People don't cling because they're helpless. They cling because you've rewired their sense of self. A lover doesn't stay because the relationship is perfect. They stay because somewhere along the way their reflection blurred into yours. When you disappear, they're not grieving the absence of your body. They're grieving the absence of the person they only knew how to be when you were watching. This is why breakups feel like amputations. You don't just lose the other person, you lose the you that was built in their eyes. It's why someone can walk away from comfort, wealth, or even security, but they'll crawl back to the person who stamped their identity. If you've ever heard someone whisper, "I don't even know who I am without them," that's not poetry, that's psychology. And identity imprint doesn't just happen in love. Look at politics. A crowd doesn't chant a leader's name because they care about the leader's grocery list or favorite meal. They chant because in that moment, their own identity feels enlarged. A flag, a slogan, a face, it doesn't matter. What matters is the merging. The leader becomes the canvas. The followers become the paint. Without the leader, they'd be blank again. It works in business too. A sharp CEO doesn't just sell a product. They sell a way of seeing yourself. Why do people stand in line for hours to buy a rectangle of glass that makes calls just like every other phone? It's not about the screen. It's about the sentence that forms in their head when they hold it. I am someone who owns this. That sentence is the hook. That's identity imprint. The power here is subtle. It's not loud like dominance or flashy like wealth. It slides in under the skin. Once it's there, even absence doesn't break it. In fact, absence makes it stronger. When someone tries to walk away, they realize they're not just walking from you, they're walking from themselves. And most people will trade anything to avoid that empty feeling. Think about cults. Nobody stays because sleeping on the floor is fun or handing over your paycheck feels good. They stay because the cult tells them who they are. Strip that away and you're not left with a free person, you're left with a hollow one. And a hollow person will crawl back to the very thing that drained them, just to feel whole again. That's the trap. The imprint doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes it's as simple as being the first person who believed in someone. That's enough to lodge yourself inside their self-story forever. Teachers know this. Coaches know this. A single phrase, "You're different, you're better, you can do this," can echo for decades. Even if the relationship ends, the echo doesn't. The cruel genius of identity imprint is that it feels like freedom while it's happening. People think they're choosing to come back. They think it's loyalty. But loyalty is often just dependency wearing a noble mask. When someone says, "I'd never betray them," what they often mean is, "If I lost them, I'd lose me too." And here's the part that unsettles people the most. You don't even need to give much. You just need to give something unique. A phrase only you say. A ritual only you two share. A perspective only you bring out of them. Over time, they start to mistake that borrowed uniqueness as their own. Remove you, and they panic. Not because of who you are, but because of who they are with you. Identity imprint is the reason why some friendships survive decades and others dissolve after a season. When someone has tied part of their self-definition to you, the bond doesn't operate on convenience. It operates on necessity, and necessity never negotiates. It's also why betrayal cuts deeper than neglect. Neglect wounds the ego. Betrayal wounds the identity. If someone cheats, lies, or abandons, the person left behind doesn't just think, "I lost them." They think, "Maybe I was never who I thought I was." That's a collapse at the level of selfhood. That collapse is what keeps them circling back, desperate to rebuild the reflection. Notice how powerful this is compared to simple validation. Validation is like a glass of water, refreshing in the moment, but quickly forgotten. Identity imprint is like digging a well inside someone. Once it's there, they have to return to it because no other source feels the same. And it doesn't fade quickly. People can forget a compliment in a week, but they won't forget the person who changed the way they see themselves. That's why even toxic bonds feel unbreakable. That's why the worst relationships are the hardest to leave, because it's not just the relationship they're leaving, it's the self that was born inside it. This is the first and strongest trigger, the one Machiavelli would have recognized immediately. People don't follow because they love you, or because they fear you, or even because they respect you. They follow because they can't find themselves without you. And once you've written yourself into someone's identity, you don't need to chase them. They'll chase you. Not because they want to, but because they have to. If identity makes people stay because of who they believe they are with you, uncertainty makes them stay because of what they can't figure out. Humans can survive almost anything, except not knowing. It's the guessing that kills them. That's why uncertainty is a stronger drug than pleasure. Pleasure ends when it arrives. Uncertainty never stops, because the brain keeps spinning the wheel looking for the next outcome. This is why people stay addicted to hot and cold dynamics. One moment you're warm, present, attentive. The next moment you vanish. The rhythm is erratic, but that's the trap. It doesn't have a rhythm at all. The mind starts to run simulations, building patterns where none exist, desperately hoping to unlock the secret. Did they pull away because of something I said? Will they call tomorrow? Were they busy or just bored? Every unanswered question digs the hook deeper. Notice how different this is from scarcity. Scarcity says, I'm rare, so you value me more. Uncertainty says, I'm unpredictable, so you obsess over me more. One manipulates supply, the other manipulates surprise. Scarcity keeps you watching the clock. Uncertainty keeps you awake at night, replaying the last conversation, wondering when the next one will happen. Scarcity is math, uncertainty is chaos, and chaos is addictive. Think about the friend who cancels plans at the last second, but still keeps you hanging, or the boss who one day praises you in front of everyone, and the next day stares at you like you're invisible. Rationally, you should walk away from people like that. But rationality collapses in the face of unpredictability. The mind starts negotiating, chasing, adjusting behavior, trying to predict what will make them stay consistent, and in that chase, you don't notice that you've already given them power. The cruel trick is that unpredictability feels like possibility. If someone rejects you outright, the story ends. But if they reject you sometimes, embrace you other times, the story never closes. Your mind writes sequels on its own, always looking for the return of the good version of them. That's why ghosting burns less than breadcrumbing. Ghosting is final. Breadcrumbing is a maze. Uncertainty can even feel like romance. People say, I love the thrill, the mystery, the chase. What they don't realize is they're addicted to anxiety, dressed up as excitement. They're mistaking adrenaline for passion. If the person ever became fully stable, predictable, always there, the spell would break. That's why people leave the partners who give them peace and chase the ones who give them storms. The storm is more stimulating than the calm. In politics, the same rule applies. A predictable tyrant loses his aura. People learn his patterns, learn when to dodge, when to resist. But a tyrant who is unpredictable, sometimes merciful, sometimes merciless, keeps the population paralyzed. Fear doesn't come from cruelty. Fear comes from not knowing when cruelty will strike. That's why uncertainty is the oldest weapon of rulers. It makes every day feel like a gamble, and gamblers never walk away when they think the next hand could change everything. In business, uncertainty is why people refresh their inbox 10 times waiting for a reply. It's why employees tolerate unstable leaders. A steady paycheck is survival, but the unpredictable compliment from a boss, the sudden promotion, the random firing, that volatility keeps people loyal out of fear and hope. They can't predict the future, so they cling tighter to the very person creating the instability, hoping to be on the right side of the next decision. The brilliance of uncertainty is that it doesn't require effort. To keep someone hooked through attention, you need to feed them constantly. To keep them hooked through gifts, you need resources. To keep them hooked through identity, you need intimacy. But to keep them hooked through uncertainty, you just need inconsistency. Withhold sometimes, indulge sometimes, say yes today, no tomorrow. You don't even need to plan it. Human psychology will do the work for you. And unlike scarcity, uncertainty doesn't make you look unavailable. It makes you look mercurial, untouchable, hard to decode. That aura alone multiplies desire. People don't just want your presence. They want to solve you. They want the key to your moods, the algorithm to your chaos. And until they solve it, they'll keep returning. Like gamblers chasing losses, convinced the next spin will finally pay. At its core, uncertainty isn't about love or control. It's about power disguised as mystery. People fear rejection, but they fear ambiguity more. Rejection frees them. Ambiguity enslaves them. That's why Machiavelli would tell you, don't just deny or grant, alternate. Keep them between hope and despair. Keep them in the fog, because nothing binds the human mind tighter than the need to resolve what refuses to resolve. If uncertainty chains the mind through chaos, reciprocity chains it through debt. The law is simple. Give and they will give back. Not because they want to, but because their conscience won't allow them not to. That's the trick. You don't need force to control people. You just need them to feel like they owe you. Humans are wired for balance. If I hand you something, even something small, your brain records the transaction like a ledger. A free coffee, a ride home, a smile when you needed it most. The cost doesn't matter. What matters is the imbalance. The mind can't tolerate being on the receiving end without repayment. That's why we defend those who've given to us, even when they no longer deserve it. Rejecting them feels like betrayal. This is how leaders buy loyalty without ever opening a bank vault. They don't give people freedom, or justice, or even wealth. They give tokens, favors, gestures, symbolic crumbs. The Roman emperors gave bread and circuses. Modern politicians give grants, subsidies, staged kindness in front of cameras. It's never charity. It's an invoice disguised as generosity, and the public pays it back in obedience, in silence, in votes. Corporations do the same. Why do companies give away free trials? It's not generosity, it's a leash. You take the gift, you taste the service, and suddenly your mind starts negotiating. I should return this with a subscription, otherwise I'm exploiting them. That's why even people drowning in debt will sign up after the trial ends. They're not just paying for the product, they're paying off a psychological debt. The clever part of reciprocity is how little it costs. You don't need to hand out gold bars. A glass of water will do, a handshake will do, a compliment will do. Once the mark is made, the weight of the debt grows on its own. The person begins to defend you in arguments, promote you when you're absent, and rationalize your flaws, because in their subconscious they're already bought. This law even works in personal relationships. Think of the person who brings you soup when you're sick. You might not even like them, but you'll answer their calls. You'll tolerate their presence. You'll help them later against your better judgment, because refusing would feel wrong. That's reciprocity in its purest form, the invisible leash of obligation. And it goes deeper than kindness. It's why abusive partners buy gifts after they've hurt someone. The cycle isn't about love, it's about debt. The victim feels guilty for receiving, even when what they received was the bare minimum. The abuser knows this. They don't apologize, they buy dinner. They know the debt will keep the victim in place longer than the bruise. Notice how different this is from validation or identity. Validation feeds the ego. Identity rewires the self. Reciprocity bypasses both and burrows straight into guilt. And guilt is a stronger motivator than affection. People will betray their own needs, their own beliefs, their own happiness, just to pay back what they think they owe. Cults thrive on this too. A free meal, a bed to sleep in, a community that welcomes you. By the time you realize the true cost, you're already shackled. You stay, not because you love the leader, but because you can't walk away from people who once clothed you when you were cold. And the cult knows it. They don't demand loyalty up front. They give first, knowing loyalty will crawl in behind it. Even at the smallest scale, reciprocity governs us. Ever notice how hard it is to refuse a salesperson offering a free sample? You taste the cube of cheese, and suddenly you feel a strange pressure to buy. That pressure is not hunger, it's debt. You've taken, now you must give. Your wallet comes out before your brain realizes what happened. Machiavelli would have laughed at the naivety of those who think gifts are free. He knew that generosity is just another mask for control. Offer bread, offer protection, offer comfort. Watch how quickly people defend you, even against their own interests. The clever ruler doesn't need soldiers. He needs supplicants who believe they owe him their safety. And here's the dark genius of reciprocity. It doesn't matter if the giver is sincere. The effect is the same. Your brain doesn't calculate intention, only imbalance. Whether the gift was manipulation or kindness, the hook is set. That's why entire nations keep honoring leaders long after their corruption has been exposed. Once someone has accepted enough gifts, walking away feels like theft. The game is not about generosity, it's about debt. And debt doesn't expire. A person who once saved your job or helped you through grief holds a lifetime claim on your loyalty. You might resent them, you might even hate them, but when the moment comes, you'll bend, because gratitude is heavier than hatred. That's reciprocity. You don't need to trap people with threats or bind them with love. You bind them with obligation. Make them feel they've taken something from you. And then step back. They'll return again and again, not because they want to, but because their conscience won't let them stay away. If reciprocity hooks people through debt, scarcity hooks them through fear of loss. The mind exaggerates the value of anything that's rare. It doesn't matter whether the rarity is real or manufactured. All that matters is the thought. If I don't grab it now, I may never have it again. That thought enslaves more effectively than any chain. Scarcity is why people chase limited editions, why auctions spiral out of control, why lovers become more desirable the moment they pull away. The human brain confuses rarity with worth. If something is hard to access, it must be valuable. If someone is hard to reach, they must be important. This illusion keeps people returning, desperate to capture what slips through their fingers. And scarcity is not the same as uncertainty. Uncertainty makes you obsessed because you don't know when or how something will happen. Scarcity makes you obsessed because you don't know if it will happen again at all. One torments with volatility, the other torments with finality. Think of a partner who suddenly limits their availability. They don't vanish completely. They appear in flashes, a quick text, a brief call, a stolen moment. Each fragment feels precious, like water in the desert. The more they ration themselves, the more you convince yourself their time must be priceless. You start bending your schedule, shrinking your needs, just to catch the rare moments they choose to appear. That's not love, that's scarcity pulling the strings. Businesses exploit this ruthlessly. A store slaps only 2 left in stock on the website. A hotel flashes 1 room remaining at this price. Do you check whether it's true? Of course not. The alarm in your mind drowns out reason. You rush to buy, and even when you realize later there were plenty of rooms, the hook has already done its work. Scarcity doesn't need to be real to be powerful. It only needs to be believed. History is filled with rulers who wielded scarcity as control, emperors who rationed food, kings who rationed access to themselves. To see the king for 1 minute meant bending, waiting, sacrificing. The scarcity of presence made the presence itself feel godlike. Machiavelli knew this. The ruler who makes himself too common loses his aura. Abundance breeds contempt. Scarcity breeds reverence. In relationships, scarcity explains why people chase those who ignore them. Indifference creates the illusion of higher value. The person who doesn't call back becomes more magnetic than the one who does. The tragedy is that the one who cares most becomes invisible, while the one who withholds care becomes unforgettable. That's scarcity at work. It flips logic upside down. Even memory bows to scarcity. Think of the friend who moved abroad. The fewer times you see them, the more special each meeting feels. It's not that they've changed, it's that access has shrunk. Scarcity rebrands ordinary interactions as treasures, and the rarer they become, the more likely you are to cling when they return. Scarcity also drives desire in social hierarchies. Invitations to exclusive events, access to private clubs, the velvet rope outside the nightclub. These aren't just barriers, they're psychological triggers. People beg to get in, not because the experience inside is extraordinary, but because the experience is limited. The fewer people allowed, the more valuable the entry feels. The genius of scarcity is that it works on everyone, even those who believe they're immune. Someone might laugh at limited edition sneakers while refreshing a site for hours trying to get concert tickets. Someone else might sneer at private clubs while chasing a manager's time. It doesn't matter where it's applied. The scarcity principle always bypasses reason and heads straight for survival instincts. And here's the cruelest part. Scarcity doesn't only raise value, it creates obsession. People replay what they can't have. They remember every detail of rare encounters. They inflate ordinary words into sacred scripts. A single glance, a single smile becomes a story they carry for years, not because the gesture was profound, but because it was rare. Scarcity etches deeper than abundance ever could. This is why rulers and manipulators ration themselves. Show up too often, and you become ordinary. Disappear too long, and you're forgotten. But drip-feed access in careful scarcity, and you become unforgettable. Each glimpse feels like a miracle, each word like scripture. People start organizing their lives around the crumbs you leave. Scarcity also explains why absence can be more addictive than presence. A lover who leaves suddenly is often more romanticized than one who stayed faithfully. Death, distance, rejection, they all create scarcity, and scarcity paints halos where none existed. The lost are remembered more beautifully than the present. The unavailable are imagined more vividly than the available. That's not nostalgia. That's the scarcity principle rewriting memory. And unlike uncertainty, scarcity doesn't need chaos. It thrives on control. You control access, you control value, you ration time, attention, presence, and people will line up for more. They'll wait, they'll fight, they'll beg, not because you are inherently extraordinary, but because you are scarce. Machiavelli would have called this the art of appearing irreplaceable. Never be too common, never be too accessible. Let them feel your absence more than your presence. Because scarcity doesn't just increase desire, it rewires importance. And when you become scarce, you don't need to chase loyalty. It comes crawling back to you, terrified of never finding you again. If scarcity makes people chase what is rare, validation makes them chase what makes them feel large. Every human carries a private wound, the fear of not being enough. Feed that wound at the right moment, and you don't just win attention, you win dependence. Validation is the drug that soothes the ego, and once someone tastes it, they return to the hand that provided it. Think of the power in a simple phrase, "You're smarter than the others," or "Nobody sees you the way I do." These words cost nothing, but they inflate the ego like helium in a balloon, and once someone feels lifted by you, they need you to keep floating. They'll come back again and again, not for you but for the feeling you create in them. Unlike identity imprint, validation doesn't rewrite the story of who they are. It polishes the surface. It's not surgery, it's makeup. But makeup can be addictive. When you become the mirror that always flatters, people will line up to stand before it. You see this everywhere. The employee who works overtime, not because of the paycheck, but because their manager occasionally says, "You're the backbone of this place." The child who grows into an adult, still chasing the rare praise of a parent who almost never gave it. The lover who tolerates chaos because in between storms there are moments where they feel worshipped. It's not love that keeps them tied, it's validation. And validation works best when it's selective. Praise everyone constantly and your words lose power. Withhold it most of the time, then deliver it like a rare jewel. And suddenly people reorganize their lives around your approval. They dress for it, they work for it, they bleed for it, all because the occasional drop of praise feels like rain in a drought. This is not the same as uncertainty. Uncertainty hooks people with unpredictability. They never know what version of you they'll get. Validation hooks them with elevation. They know exactly what they'll get when you finally give it. A surge of worthiness. Scarcity makes your presence valuable. Validation makes their presence feel valuable. Different mechanics, different hooks. And notice how validation doesn't even need truth. A lie delivered with conviction can work just as well. Tell a fool they're wise, and they'll come back to you for more wisdom. Tell a coward they're brave, and they'll return to you when they're scared. You're not selling accuracy, you're selling ego repair, and the ego doesn't care if the reflection is distorted, as long as it looks bigger. Politicians master this art. They don't promise policies, they promise identities. You are the true patriots. You are the hard-working backbone of this nation. The crowd cheers, not because anything material was offered, but because they felt seen, flattered, enlarged. Later, when policies fail, the crowd forgives. Why? Because the politician still validates their worth. The speech matters more than the outcome. Influencers play the same game. They tell their followers, "You're different. You're the kind of people who get it while others sleep." That's not content. That's flattery disguised as wisdom. And it works. Millions come back daily, not for information but for affirmation. The dopamine spike from feeling chosen is enough to create addiction. Validation even fuels destructive relationships. A partner may insult you 9 times out of 10, but the 10th time they say, "Nobody will ever understand you like I do," and that single line resets the scoreboard. The insults blur, the flattery shines. People stay chained to pain because the crumbs of validation taste sweeter than silence. The Machiavellian mind knows this. You don't need to praise constantly. You need to praise strategically. Feed the ego when it's hungry. Withdraw when it's bloated. Keep people slightly starving for your approval, and they'll orbit you like moons around a planet. They'll seek your gaze, your nod, your rare blessing, and in that seeking, they surrender control. Validation also creates competition. When 2 people both crave your approval, they'll fight each other for it. You don't need to pit them against each other. They'll do it themselves, chasing the prize of your flattery. This is how leaders build loyal armies without lifting a finger. Soldiers will bleed not just for the cause but for the honor of being called the bravest. Unlike reciprocity, validation doesn't bind through guilt. Unlike scarcity, it doesn't bind through fear of loss. Validation binds through desire for elevation. It makes people addicted to a version of themselves that shines brighter in your presence. And that addiction is powerful because it masquerades as self-esteem while actually being dependence. The cruel genius is that validation feels harmless. What's wrong with a compliment? What's wrong with encouragement? Nothing, until it becomes the leash. When someone realizes that their sense of worth rises and falls with your opinion, it's already too late. They're hooked, and even if you starve them of it, they'll linger, hoping the next dose will come. Machiavelli would have recognized validation as the cheapest form of power. No armies, no gold, no grand gestures, just words, whispered in the right ear. They can bend wills, shift loyalties, spark wars. Because at the end of the day, people don't just fight for survival, they fight for the feeling that they matter. And if you become the one who gives them that feeling, they'll follow you through fire, not out of duty, but out of hunger for the mirror you hold. Validation may feed the ego, but authority commands the body. Humans are born into hierarchies. From childhood, someone has always stood above them. A parent, a teacher, a boss, a ruler. The instinct to obey is older than reason. That's why authority doesn't just persuade, it compels. And once you're recognized as an authority, people don't just come back, they kneel. Unlike reciprocity, authority doesn't need a gift. Unlike scarcity, it doesn't need absence. Unlike uncertainty, it doesn't need chaos. Authority is power condensed into presence. The mere perception that you stand higher on the ladder is enough. People will follow even when they disagree, comply even when they resent it, defend even when they're oppressed, because deep inside the brain whispers, stay close to power or be crushed by it. History offers endless proof. Entire nations have obeyed tyrants not out of love, but out of instinct. The Milgram experiments showed it clearly. Ordinary people, instructed by a figure in a white coat, delivered shocks they believed could kill, not because they were cruel, but because an authority told them to. Strip away uniforms, titles, crowns, and the spell weakens. Add them back and obedience flows like water downhill. In relationships, authority plays out in quieter ways. A partner who carries certainty, who makes decisions without hesitation, often becomes the axis the other revolves around. Even strong independent people slip into obedience when they sense someone else has more command of reality. Authority isn't about volume, it's about conviction. The one who seems unshakable becomes the one others orbit. And here's the trick. Authority doesn't have to be real, it only has to be perceived. People follow the confident fool more readily than the uncertain genius. They trust the loud over the wise, the uniform over the civilian, the title over the skill. Authority is theater as much as it is truth. That's why Machiavelli insisted it's better to be feared than loved. Fear amplifies authority's stage presence, while love risks leveling the stage. Corporations thrive on this principle. Titles create obedience before competence does. Employees bend to the manager's word, not because the manager is smarter, but because the org chart has an arrow pointing downwards. Soldiers salute a superior, not because the superior is braver, but because the badge says so. Humans don't just obey people, they obey symbols. And symbols are powerful precisely because they bypass thought. Nobody stops to analyze whether a robe makes a judge wiser or a crown makes a monarch divine. The mind sees the symbol and surrenders. This is why cult leaders craft elaborate costumes, why politicians stage their speeches before flags, why CEOs sit at higher tables. It's not decoration, it's hierarchy reinforcement. Authority also creates dependency. Once someone accepts you as their superior, they stop questioning themselves. They look to you for direction, for permission, for affirmation. They outsource their will. And once that happens, leaving you feels like stepping into chaos. People fear the burden of freedom more than the pain of obedience. That's why they return. Not because you forced them, but because you relieved them of the terror of choice. Notice how different this is from validation. Validation tells someone, you're enough. Authority tells them, you're under me. Validation feels like comfort. Authority feels like order. And humans will trade comfort for order when they fear disorder, more than pain. That's the Machiavellian insight. People tolerate cruelty if it comes with clarity. Even rebellion proves the power of authority. Rebels rarely dismantle hierarchies. They replace them. When one leader falls, another rises. The throne is never empty for long. The human psyche demands someone sit in it. That's why revolutions often end with new tyrants, because people don't actually want freedom, they want a stronger hand to follow. Authority also explains why absence sometimes strengthens power, instead of weakening it. A ruler who disappears into mystery doesn't lose control. They become myth. Their silence is read as wisdom, their distance as strength. Even death can amplify authority. Martyrs rule more fiercely from the grave than they ever did alive. Because once authority merges with narrative, it no longer needs presence to command obedience. Machiavelli would have advised rulers to cultivate authority at all costs. Not kindness, not morality, not even justice. Those are luxuries. Authority is survival. Once you sit high enough in the hierarchy, you don't need to beg, persuade, or flatter. You only need to exist. People will return, not for love, not for gifts, not for validation. They'll return because gravity pulls downward, and authority sits at the top like a mountain no one dares climb. This is the final trigger. The deepest truth is this: people don't always come back to you because they want to. They come back because the architecture of their psychology leaves them no choice. Identity chains the self. Uncertainty chains the mind. Reciprocity chains the conscience. Scarcity chains desire. Validation chains the ego. And authority chains the will itself. 6 triggers, each different, each binding in its own way. Alone they are powerful. Together they are irresistible. Use them well, and you won't need to chase loyalty. Loyalty will chase you, and the ones who swore they'd never kneel will be the first to return, not because of who you are, but because of what you've activated inside them. That's the Machiavellian game. And once you learn the triggers, you stop asking why people come back. You start asking how they could ever leave,